Hi, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. I'm Alice Roach from the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri, and I will be your host today. With each of these 30-minute webinars, we intend to share research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, and communities. For today's webinar, Dr. Amanda Alexander will present about hosting virtual events. Before I invite her to begin, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. First, we'll close the webinar today with a question and answer session. Those of you who connected to today's webinar via your computer can submit your questions in the chat screen. So to open the chat screen, just click the chat button that you see at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you joined by phone, then you can email me your questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical difficulties during today's webinar, then you can let me know by either submitting a comment in the chat screen, or you can also send me an email at roacham@missouri.edu. Fourth, we will make a webinar recording available to you. You can look for an email from Zoom in about a day from now that shares more about where you can access that recording. Additionally, you can find all of our previous Engaging for Missouri webinars on our division's YouTube page. So now we'll transition to the topic of today's webinar, which is titled Events Industry 2020, Expecting the Unexpected and Hosting Virtual Events. Presenting on this topic is Dr. Amanda Alexander, who is an assistant teaching professor in our division's hospitality management program. So thank you, Amanda, for presenting today. If you could please start your video and unmute your microphone, then we can begin today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Alice, for that introduction, and thank you all for coming in on this jury day here in Missouri. Today we are going to be talking about the events industry, and to get that started, I did want to kind of give you a basis for what our event industry does look like to begin with. Let's see. All right, so coming from Meetings Mean Business, they are a events industry research based. When we talk about some of these data that I do have, we are defining meetings as 10 or more participants that are coming together for a minimum of 4 hours to achieve a common purpose, which that common purpose is going to come into importance later on when we start talking about how we do prepare for our virtual events, and actually really whether it is a virtual or a face-to-face meeting. I do want to say that this is our business meetings, including our association, our corporate, our nonprofit, our government, but we are excluding from that research study anything that is purely social. So if you had a family gathering of 10 or more people, yes, it is truly an event, but for the purposes of this research, this wasn't included in there, along with other things such as an educational session that is truly within a classroom setting. Because again, if you have that 10 or more, which in truly fundamentals of events, 2 or more people can validate it being an event. We have excluded this kind of regularly scheduled. Additionally, recreational activities and consumer expos. So that might be those that are more open to the public. So when we talk about meetings in business, we look at those personal connections. It's all about that one-on-one or within that group dynamic of being able to connect with one another, to be able to network, getting that face-to-face. We look at the corporate, the business side of it, whether that's meeting with clients, potential clients, retaining those clients, and be able to still achieve goals or provide a service, whether it is that we're looking at brand recognition, or we're looking at, then like the events world, securing a contract for a venue. And then our economic growth, it even goes beyond just our direct impacts of the meetings industry. We look at those indirect, those added jobs as added economic growth. And we'll get into that more here in just a minute. So when we look at kind of our growth year to year, and this does go up to 2016, and you will see there is a little bit difference in the years that it goes up to, and that's just the available data as it does come. But the big picture that I want you to get from here is that we have been seeing an increase in both indirect and direct. And even bigger, that we're seeing that the number of meeting attendees or those participating in events has continued to grow. And so we want to make sure that that does continue, whether we are doing face-to-face or virtual, to make sure that the sector doesn't just drop off. It does get a little bit trickier, and we'll get into that as we are talking about virtual events. Kind of again, just kind of put it in perspective. Again, this is coming from Meetings Means Business with the Events Industry Council. Our direct impacts is at 1.5 billion participants. Billion, with our total impact that we have 1.5 trillion in GDP. And to kind of put that into perspective, if the events industry was looking at kind of a global aspect and looking at economies, we would be ranked the 13th largest economy in the world. And I'm not talking like US, I'm talking about the events industry in total. So you kind of look at that, how big of an impact and the number of jobs, 25.9 million total jobs. That's quite a big number, and it shows the importance that we do have on our global economy scale. And this kind of brings it to US scale when we are looking at it. That we in the US, we do in North America, we have that largest in terms of number of direct jobs, along with the dollars that we are being spent when we look at the global aspect. All right, we'll keep on moving. I'm going to make sure that I do keep within time. I can get rambling, so I'll make sure that I try not to do that. And as I mentioned before, some of these, it's regardless of whether we are talking, so IRL in real life or virtual. Regardless, what is the purpose? That should always be our driving question to begin with. And really answer that question, why are we holding an event? It doesn't matter whether it is that social, that entertaining, the educational awareness, whether it is medically and we're looking at awareness of a disease, or we're looking at brand awareness of whether it's a startup or a well-recognized brand such as Walmart that wants to show what they are doing in a certain time or where they are. So what is that purpose? So why are we holding that event? And you should always be able to look at any facet of that event and really be able to answer. Are we looking, that we want to get those numbers up? Are we wanting to raise money? Are we providing the entertainment? Okay. So then we can move to our who is the audience. And this is where it kind of becomes the first rule, second question, because your purpose and your audience, they do go hand in hand. But we're recognizing that your demographics are going to change based on who and what you are looking for to achieve. And really knowing and understanding those preferences. This does become really important, especially when we are looking at our virtual events and recognizing that some of our participants, they may really want these different avenues, different platforms to be able to submit Q&As, to be able to have a side chat, that they want those live videos, or that they want to be able to go and access that content later. What are those preferences? So it's really understanding. And the wonderful thing about virtual is we are going to be able to truly understand our attendees and our participants as we continue working through virtual events and we get that feedback. And getting that feedback, we'll get more into that a little bit later, why that does become really important and vital to our continued success and to develop expectations. Okay, so how do we measure success? Number one, you should be setting those goals when you are discussing and setting what your purpose is. Because if it is that brand awareness and it's creating 1,500 more views or 1,500 likes, that's something that you should set early on, and that's going to help flow. So then at the conclusion of your event, and you're looking, whether it is you're looking at your outcomes, you're looking at post-event surveys, you're looking at any of that feedback, you're looking at dollars, whatever it is, that you can easily say, did we achieve that goal? Did we not achieve that goal? And I will say, not achieving a goal is just as important as achieving a goal in the events world. Just because we learned from how and why did we not achieve that goal? And what can we do and modify for in the future to be able to succeed? Okay, so just because in keeping that in mind is so then you don't set a goal that is maybe undershooting or not challenging what you as the event team or you as the host can do with that event, okay? And then keeping in mind who your stakeholders are. And that is both your internal and your external. So when we're looking at internal, we can say whether it is our CEOs, our employees. If our employees are attendees, they kind of go back and forth with that internal, external because they are both. And so kind of an example of that might be that if you are having a quarterly meeting, and it might be mandatory for your employees to attend, what can you do to where it's not, this is a mandatory event that I have to attend, but I'm excited. I want to go to that quarterly event. Okay. So then that goes back up to your preferences. Who is attending? What do they want to get out of it? So they kind of go intertwining into with one another. And if you do consider all those, things should run a little bit smoother. In the events world, kind of as my title implicated, expecting the unexpected. We always have that unexpected that pops up. It's that when is it going to? Because we always know something is going to go maybe not quite as planned. Okay. All right. And to kind of just really put it into perspective, when I do kind of talk about our hybrid, and there are these discussions of we've been able to move things virtually, we've been able to move things online. Is there this fear that we're going to lose this face-to-face? I say absolutely not. We're not going to lose that face-to-face because for one, people, they crave this interaction with people. And there's something that you just can't quite achieve through a computer. It's that difference. And so just kind of put it out there for you. Meetings Doing Business, they estimate that 1 hour face-to-face contact equals 5 video conferences or 10 phone calls or 20 emails. And kind of theories behind it, we get into media richness theory. That can be a whole nother discussion. But just showing that face-to-face, you really truly can, whether it's those nonverbal cues, those body language that you are projecting, that does happen in those face-to-face contacts that you can't quite get even through a video conference and seeing somebody's body. Okay, so with hosting your virtual event, one of the huge advantages, and we are seeing this low barrier of entry, that we are having high participation rates, which is great and it is awesome. So we are seeing, especially in those events that have become free online, that maybe weren't free before, that we're seeing that participation rate go up. So that is great because it might be that then this is your chance to really showcase and say, now next year, when we are back live and face-to-face, come to our event. So that low barrier of entry, that is a great opportunity. Significant lower carbon footprint. Going green is always a concern in making sure that we are preserving our environment. And so going virtual does mean typically less paper. We're not printing schedules. We're not printing that master agenda, even things down to signage. And so it does have that impact, which is also a great side of this, honesty. So this is where, with the stats that we do have, obviously with kind of this influx of virtual events, we are seeing, so this might end up changing, but what we have seen right now that we do have participants or attendees at a 29%, they are more likely to ask a question, engage, give their perspective in a meeting, in comparison to our live face-to-face. If you have a audience with a keynote speaker and it has thousands of individuals, somebody might be a little bit more reserved on asking that question. However, we are seeing in these virtual events that we have these attendees that they are more likely to be engaged and ask those questions, which is great. And on the virtual expo, the virtual fair side of it, we're seeing that there's a 39% increase, that we have attendees that are actually engaging in those virtual booths rather than just maybe walking on by to see what the freebies are. That 39% that we have them engaging with those vendors, asking questions, getting information, which is great. That's awesome for our vendors. And it might be a component when we talk about hybrid, that we kind of implement both. So data tracking, it's all about the data, right? And so we're able to, from the get-go of even looking about about that event. How many people have been looking? How many people are inquiring information? We're able to gather information from that registration point to how many people did come and watch live versus how many people did access afterwards, those on demand. So there's a lot of data, even down to, which obviously you do have to get your attendees' consent, but even doing kind of this emotional tracking to look for engagement of our attendees, to be able to see when they've kind of went off and they've looked at email, they're on social media. And all social media isn't bad necessarily in our virtual events, because it could be that they are talking about our event, which is a awesome positive as well too. And so data tracking can be huge as we are developing our virtual events. This ability to create reusable content. It's pretty easy on a lot of our platforms to be able to hit that record and then have access to that at a later date. The question does then become for how long and who does have access. Okay, cost savings, I say maybe. Yes, we have seen a lot of industry articles that talk about our cost savings. However, when we start talking about the creativity side and making sure that we are keeping an engaged audience, there's parts of that budget that is going to be spent in different ways. And so I say maybe because I wouldn't just say, oh, this is an absolute free event. We can go to this platform at no cost and boom, we've saved all our budget. I wouldn't quite go to that extent. So our disadvantages, technical complexity. So our technical complexity kind of really dives into, it's not that we have more technology, we just have different technology, and keeping that in perspective, because those audience or those attendees that might be a little nervous about engaging in technology, keeping them aware that they do have that support, that you will be able to provide information to them if they aren't quite sure about it, and that the technology has just changed, okay? This idea of competing for attendees. With everything being virtual, it's, if it is a live session, who do you have live and what other competitors are there out there that are providing that live, whether it's at the same time, because it might be before that your advantage was your location or your destination. But when we're going live, your destination, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later too, but that doesn't have as big of a impact, okay? Our attendee attention span. Attention span is always an interesting topic to end up talking about, because how long, how many seconds that you do have their attention before you need to grab it again and move on to another topic. And when we're in this virtual setting, that temptation, especially now, we are in a different time, we're in challenging times, where you have your attendees that not only are we grabbing their attention from whether it's their phone, their social media, their, oh, I'm just gonna check my email real quick, but you also have those distractions of whether it is kids or other family responsibilities that can grab their attention. Security considerations. This kind of wraps into the cost savings, because like I said before, if you do kind of neglect and say this is just going to be a free event, you might really be downplaying security that you do absolutely need, whether it is password protected getting into a call, whether it's you're looking at a higher than even that, if we're looking at information, registration numbers they have to input, and making sure that what is public needs to be public, and then what's private is private, and at what level and what extent. And the disadvantage, the increased cost, kind of as I was saying before, just making sure that you're aligning your budget to meet those needs, and we're not just saying this is absolutely free, right? So converting to virtual events, we've seen this happen a lot lately. That we need to communicate early and we need to communicate often. That we need to make sure that we're staying in communication, especially if it wasn't in person, that we're letting them know what are we doing and how are we going to accommodate what that virtual event was going to be. And I've kind of alluded to this. I'm going to try to I'm sorry, I know I get long-winded. But making sure that we're not just absolutely, as that host or as the event planner is going to, what platform and at what cost. Just kind of the same way that you wouldn't go to a destination, go, I need 500 attendees to be able to fit in a venue. What is my cheapest venue? Because that completely neglects how many breakout sessions, what are your other needs that you do need, okay? All right, so making the most out of your virtual event. I kind of alluded to this earlier, making sure that you are staying up to date with your competitive analysis in moving to a virtual event. What are your competitors doing? What are they offering? How are they offering? So you can't rely on old data that might be a little bit outdated. And you keeping aware that your attendees are still looking for an experience. And in our virtual events, it starts before day of. In our live events, it could be that that registration process maybe didn't go quite as well. However, in your virtual events, that registration process gets grouped in with that experience. So recognizing that. Providing breaks, acknowledging distractions. So making sure that you do give them 5-10 minutes to go grab a snack, which is a awesome opportunity to get your sponsors, whether they're sending a box that has snacks in it, or they are providing the music, the background for those breaks. Okay. So strategies to influence that experience, basic necessities, making sure that your attendees and your keynotes, anybody that is presenting, that they know what your expectations are, that you talk about things such as time zone differences. For our keynotes, making sure they have the equipment, the technology that is needed, whether it's lights, cameras, every bit of that, and maybe having to mail that to them. Providing engagement, whether that's through Q&A chat boxes, it's through polls, any side of that that gets them engaged and keeps them on track and brings that attention back. Thinking creatively. One of those ideas is with our catering and our food and beverage. Rather than saying, well, we don't have catering, don't have food and beverage, it's having delivery or having pickup options for your attendees to be able to go someplace and pick it up. And so then at that 11:30, 12, that you have that 30-minute break and that food is delivered directly to their home for them. So thinking outside that box for them. And realizing that your conversation is before, so that communication piece, the during, listening to what support issues they need, any technology they're having, and then getting that information from the survey afterwards. Okay, I'm getting close on time. So instead of eliminating budgets, thinking creatively how you can move that. I have this picture up there of the NFL draft from 2020. So, and I kind of talk about this as a big picture opportunity, thinking creatively, finding these alternatives. Last year in Nashville, 600,000 people together, that experience. Couldn't happen this year. What did they do? They turned it to virtual. So now we have, independent, you see between 2 and 3 million that they were able to capture. And they stayed true to certain traditions, like booing the commissioner. And beyond booing the commissioner and still capturing that tradition, Bud Light even jumped in there and said, hey, for each hashtag that is boo the commissioner, we'll give $1 back to part of that campaign. And so far, as of April 24th, they are right at $4 million through different efforts, not just the hashtag boo the commish, but through other efforts that the NFL draft has been able to bring, whether it is Feeding America, different organizations that were linked with that as well too. So really capturing in on those. I brought up there our Mizzou graduation. We're having our first virtual graduation. Mizzou has done an awesome job with providing these resources to everything from 2 weeks out, this is what you should be doing, to a week out, to day of, this is what you need to be doing, from everything from yard signs to encouraging them to have delivery with catering, to providing stickers for Instagram, for Facebook, whatever it might end up being. They've provided all those resources. So it's creating alternatives and making the best of what we do have. One of the things that we do need to understand too, though, is that as we progress through virtual events, these expectations on the attendee side is going to develop and change. So right now, all these new and creative and innovative ideas, they're awesome and they're great, but we're going to have to continue developing those to meet those expectations of our attendees and still continue to wow them to create that experience. All right, so our future events industry. This is kind of a really big unknown because we still have these, when are we gonna be able to have these mega events? When are we gonna be able to congregate with thousands of people? That's a little unknown. So size capacity of venues, knowing the 6-foot rule, knowing max of 6 per table. So our max capacities, that may change and it may evolve, continue to evolve to change. making sure our cleanliness, when we have multi-day, that our attendees know that our venues are being cleaned and prepared for the next day. And the safety greeter, this is a new position in which we are kind of looking at with our venues, of making attendees aware of what we are doing, what we're doing differently, how to protect them, how to protect our employees, how to protect everybody that is involved. Okay. Food and beverage becoming more and more creative, like the delivery to home. But then when we're looking at buffets, what does that look like? There was a Adobe event in which they created their salads in kind of these fun looking buckets. So they're completely enclosed. Using kind of a bento style, that can be something that we do develop and look at. And then the importance of hybrid. So bringing back our face-to-face, but providing those opportunities for our attendees to be able to access virtual events, whether it is live streaming or we are talking on demand, which is two different things. One thing I do want to, as I'm pulling this all together, with your hybrid, to make sure that you are being really cognizant that with a hybrid event, you have two audiences. You have your face-to-face audience and you have your live streaming. And sometimes that can be two different preferences, two different what they're looking to get out of that, and making sure you are meeting their needs to make sure they want to attend your event year after year and to continue attending. So that does take a little bit more careful working through to make sure that you have two audiences that you are meeting their needs. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. I know I kind of ran a little bit over on that 15 to 20 minute. I'll kind of hand it on over to Alice to field those questions.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. We do have a question that you pointed out that increased costs are a potential disadvantage for virtual events. So this may seem counterintuitive given all the free virtual platforms. So what are perhaps some of the hidden costs that people tend to overlook when it comes to hosting a virtual event?
Awesome. Good question. So kind of some of those hidden costs can be looking at our staffing. Because there's this temptation of, we've seen it where we have seen companies that have furloughed, even these venues, these large venues, that now if they are kind of serving as a platform, the behind the scenes, kind of as you're serving as our moderator for this. If we have a multi-day conference with our breakout sessions, you need to have a moderator for each and every single one of those sessions. And beyond the moderator, you need to have the technology behind it. You need to have the support behind it. So some of that technology support can be some of those hidden costs. Some of these thinking creatively outside of the box, such as if we're looking at creating the fun side of events and hosting something as a paint a wine glass or a wine tasting element of it. You have to mail those supplies to your attendees. So we may have a mailing cost in there that we didn't have in our face-to-face. You may have, now that you're having to provide on a larger scale some of these supplies, such as like with painting the glasses. You have to individualize that to each attendee, where in person, you may have had sharing opportunities to share those supplies. So some of those supplies you may have more cost on. So depending on what your purpose is of that event and what side of it you're looking at, it can be kind of that hidden cost. And it really gets into that, this tendency of looking at virtual events and saying, well, we can just cut it, or we can cut this cost, and that you end up cutting too many people or too many supplies, or cutting in the wrong areas, that you're not fully taking in how you still want to engage and meet every element of the event.
Great, thank you for that. A lot of virtual content, as you've mentioned, has been free since the pandemic began, even things that had a cost associated previously. So what are your thoughts about whether virtual events can be monetized, particularly in the long term, if we're looking at virtual events being more of a viable option for us as we're still kind of experiencing some coronavirus related impacts?
Right, absolutely. And it has been, I will say, organizations such as PCMA, CVent, they have done an awesome job at providing those resources to everybody. But I think what we are going to see in the industry, as those expectations grow and continue to evolve, we're going to have this realization that we need the experts to really step in and say, how do we do this? How do we provide this? And what amenities can we provide to attendees, to our hosts as well too? Digital, they have, and they've been a paid one, but they are not accepting any new clients until 2021 because they have had this influx of saying we need this. And so I think that you're going to see these other platforms that maybe are free, that's how they're going to have to kind of distinguish too. They're going to have to add that cost back in there. So then the host, whatnot, that they are paying, it kind of gets down to you're paying for what you end up getting as well too. And it can also then go to my whole soapbox that I get into when you get people that say, well, anybody can plan a party. Anybody can plan an event. Well, maybe yes, but are they going to do it at the extent that you want it? Are they going to create that experience? And so I think that that's kind of when we start talking about that, are we going to be able to monetize? Yeah, we absolutely will be able to, because we're going to realize that right now what we're doing does satisfy a need and a want. But long term, as we continue to develop and we develop these experiences, they're going to be more higher expectations. And then it's going to become, how do we do that? And how do we make sure that we don't have any glitches in even streaming? How do we make sure that all avenues, whether we created on Slack, it's an app that you can have on your phone that you can kind of create these channels and this communication platform. You're gonna have to have somebody that does look at that in all these little avenues, depending on where you get. Make sure they're all being effectively monitored too.
Great. Well, thank you, Amanda. It's time to close for today. We appreciate you sharing today's webinar presentation, and thank you to our audience too. When you exit Zoom, you'll see a post-webinar survey will load in your browser. If you could please consider responding, we'll use your results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future webinar topics. Again, you should receive a webinar recording with about a day from now, and you can access the recording within that email. Our next Engaging for Missouri webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, May 20th. Dr. Brad Kurz, who is the John C. Weaver Faculty Fellow in Higher Education Administration at Mizzou, will speak about COVID-19 in higher education, governmental and institutional policy responses. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a nice weekend.